The dust in Millfield, Oklahoma was a living thing. It coated your tongue, stung your eyes, and settled in the lines on your hands like a map of all your sorrows. In the summer of 1885, my map was getting mighty complicated. I stood there at the county auction, my pregnant belly straining the seams of my last good dress, and held the rope of our last milk cow, Bessie. She was more than livestock. She was the only thing standing between my two children and a winter of slow starvation. Emma, my wise-eyed 8-year-old, watched from the back of our rickety wagon, her face a mask of worry. Samuel, only 5, was too young to understand the gravity, but he knew hunger. His little frame was a testament to it. My husband Robert had been gone 3 years, taken by a fever that swept through our homestead like a prairie fire, and I'd been fighting a losing battle ever since. The auctioneer's voice droned on, a meaningless buzz in the heat. Men in weathered boots kicked at the dirt, their faces hard, their eyes calculating. This was a place of endings, not beginnings. Then the crowd parted. A man stepped forward. He wasn't like the others. His boots were polished leather, reflecting the harsh sun. His shoulders were broad, filling out a clean work shirt. He was tall, with an air of quiet authority that silenced the murmurs around him. Grayson Vance. Even I knew the name. He was the wealthiest rancher in 3 counties, a man who owned land that stretched from one horizon to the other, a man who'd lost his own wife and child years ago and had kept to himself ever since. He raised a hand, his voice deep and steady. He didn't shout, he didn't haggle. He just stated a price so far above Bessie's worth that a gasp went through the crowd. The auctioneer, stunned for a moment, slammed his gavel down. Sold to Mr. Grayson Vance. My heart plummeted. It was over. The last lifeline was cut. I felt the tears coming, hot and shameful, and I fought them back. I would not cry in front of these people. I would not cry in front of my children. Grayson Vance walked toward me. He moved with a purpose that was terrifying. He took the rope from my numb fingers, his hand brushing mine. It was rough, calloused, a working man's hand despite his wealth. Then he did something that made the whole world stop. He turned right around and pressed the rope back into my hand. "She belongs with your family, Mrs. Monroe," he said, his voice low so only I could hear. He'd paid $50, a fortune, and was just giving her back. The crowd stared, mouths agape. I couldn't form words. My mind was a whirlwind of confusion and disbelief. He tipped his hat, his gray eyes meeting mine for just a second. There was something in them, a sadness I recognized, a shadow of a loss as deep as my own. Then he turned and walked away, disappearing back into the crowd as if he'd never been there. I stood there, clutching Bessie's rope, the $50 he'd paid now a debt of gratitude I could never repay. But as I led my cow and my children home, a cold knot of dread formed in my stomach. Kindness like that didn't exist in 1885 Oklahoma, not without a price, and I had a terrible feeling I was about to find out what that price was. What he did next would change both our lives forever, but would it be enough to survive what was coming? Before we jump back in, tell us in the comments where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because I've saved something extra special for you. Leading Bessie home, the cow's bell, which usually sounded so comforting, now chimed like a warning. Every step away from the auction grounds felt like a step into a deeper mystery. "Mama, why did the man give Bessie back?" Emma's voice was small beside me, her bare feet kicking up little clouds of red dust. She'd seen too much hardship for a girl of 8, and it had made her wary of anything that seemed too good to be true. "I don't rightly know, sweetheart," I murmured, the lie tasting like ash in my mouth. Sometimes people do kind things just to be kind. Even as I said it, I didn't believe it. Men like Grayson Vance didn't just hand over $50 out of the goodness of their hearts. Not in a world where every penny was counted, and every neighbor was just one bad harvest away from ruin. There were always strings. Always. Is he going to be our friend, Mama? Samuel bounced in the wagon, his innocence a painful contrast to my own churning thoughts. He had nice boots. The memory of those polished boots, of his quiet, commanding presence, sent a shiver down my spine. The way he'd looked at me, it wasn't pity. It was something else, something I couldn't decipher. "We'll see, Samuel," I whispered, one hand resting on my swollen belly. The baby inside me kicked, as if sensing my unease. As we crested the last hill, our homestead came into view. My heart clenched. What Robert and I had built with so much love and hope now looked like a wound on the landscape. The house sagged. The shingles were askew. The garden was a patch of withered brown stalks. The land itself seemed to be mourning him, refusing to give up its bounty without his strong hands to work it. Then Emma pointed, her small hand trembling. "Mama, look!" My blood ran cold. Tacked to our front door was a piece of paper, a white, official-looking paper that stood out against the weathered wood like a skull and crossbones. I helped the children down from the wagon and walked toward the door on legs that felt like lead. The words swam before my eyes, stark and cruel in the afternoon sun. Final notice of eviction, 30 days. We had 30 days before the bank seized the property. 30 days until we were homeless. I sank onto the porch steps, the notice crumpling in my fist. It wasn't just the local bank. This notice was from some firm in Oklahoma City I'd never even heard of. Farmers Trust Bank. It felt bigger, colder, more impersonal than anything I could fight. "Mama, what's wrong?" Emma's voice was a pinprick of sound in the roaring silence of my panic. I looked at my children, at their wide, worried eyes, and I knew I couldn't fall apart. I was their rock, their only shield against the world. "Nothing that can't be fixed," I lied, forcing a smile that felt like it was cracking my face. But as I led Bessie to her pen, my mind was racing. Grayson Vance, his inexplicable act of charity, this sudden crushing eviction from a bank I didn't know. The pieces didn't fit. It felt like I was caught in a game where I didn't even know the rules. And then a horrifying thought took root. What if his kindness wasn't kindness at all? What if it was the first move in a calculated plan? What if he knew about the eviction? What if he wanted my land? The idea was poison, but it made a terrible kind of sense. A rich man with endless acres wouldn't even notice my small, failing plot. Unless there was something on it. Something he wanted. The $50 hadn't been a gift. It was an investment, and I was standing right in the middle of his claim. The sound of hoofbeats the next morning sent a jolt of pure fear through me. I was kneading dough for our meager breakfast, and my hands froze in the flour. Through the kitchen window I saw him, Grayson Vance, riding a fine bay horse, moving with an easy confidence that seemed to mock my own terror. He dismounted, and my heart hammered against my ribs. He wasn't just a rich rancher anymore. He was a predator, and I was his prey. "Mrs. Monroe," he called out, his voice calm and steady. "I hope I'm not intruding." I stepped onto the porch, smoothing my apron with trembling hands, trying to project a strength I didn't feel. "Mr. Vance, what brings you out this way?" Emma clung to my dress, while Samuel, ever fearless, ran down the steps. "You're the man with the nice boots," he declared. A smile touched Grayson's lips, but it didn't reach his eyes. Those gray eyes were fixed on me, assessing, calculating. "That I am, son." He looked back at me. "I'll speak plainly, Mrs. Monroe. I heard about your trouble with the bank." My breath caught, so he did know. The web was closing in. "I appreciate your concern," I said, my voice tight. "But we're managing. Are you?" His gaze swept over the sagging porch, the peeling paint, my threadbare dress. "Forgive me for being blunt, but you're carrying a child. Winter is coming, and that eviction notice gives you less than a month. I'm not here to take your land, Mrs. Monroe. I'm here to offer you a way to keep it." I stared at him, my mind reeling. This wasn't what I expected. "How?" "Work," he said simply. "I need a household manager. Cooking, cleaning, keeping the accounts. The pay is good, enough to satisfy the bank and keep you afloat. There are quarters on my property for you and the children." You would have your own space, your own life. It was a lifeline, a way out of the darkness that was threatening to swallow us whole. It was also a trap. Living on his land, under his roof, I would be completely at his mercy. Why? The word escaped my lips before I could stop it. Why would you make such an offer to a stranger? He took a step closer, his shadow falling over me. Let's just say your late husband and I had some unfinished business. Robert was a good man, but he left behind some complicated knots. I feel a certain responsibility to help untangle them. Robert? He knew Robert? My husband had never mentioned the man. They ran in different circles entirely. A cold dread, colder than the fear of eviction, crept into my heart. What unfinished business? What knots? I don't understand, I whispered. You don't need to, he said, his voice softening just a fraction. All you need to do is accept my offer. It's a formal contract. Everything will be spelled out, legal and proper. Your wages, your duties, your privacy, all protected. A contract. He'd come prepared. This wasn't an impulse. This was a plan. He reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a folded set of papers. Think it over, Mrs. Monroe, but don't take too long. The bank won't wait, and neither will Winter. He mounted his horse with a fluid grace, then looked down at me. That strange, sad look was back in his eyes. Your children deserve a chance, he said. Sometimes accepting help is the bravest thing a person can do. As he rode away, I stood clutching the porch rail for support, the contract feeling heavy and dangerous in my hand. He knew Robert. He knew about the eviction, and he had a contract ready and waiting. This wasn't about kindness. It wasn't about pity. It was about something my husband had done, a secret he'd carried to his grave. And Grayson Vance was going to use that secret to own me. The eviction notice lay on the kitchen table like a death sentence, the red stamp of the bank glowing like a hot coal. 27 days. The number screamed in my head. I had Grayson Vance's contract on the table right next to it. It was thick, professional, full of legal words I barely understood. It promised a safe harbor, a wage that felt like a king's ransom, a future for my children. But it felt like a cage. A gilded cage, but a cage nonetheless. Mama, why do you keep looking at those papers? Emma asked, her voice pulling me from my dark thoughts. Her 8-year-old eyes saw everything. Just thinking, sweetheart, I said, putting a slice of bread and a dab of precious jam in front of her. Are we going to have to move? She asked, her tone matter of fact. She had learned too young that life didn't sugarcoat its blows. I couldn't lie to her. We might have to, yes. Samuel looked up, his face suddenly serious. Where will we go? I'm not sure yet, I said, the words catching in my throat. But we'll figure something out. We always do. The lie was so thin it was transparent. We weren't figuring things out. We were sinking. And Grayson Vance was offering the only lifeboat in sight. But what was his price? Unfinished business with Robert. What could that possibly mean? Robert was a simple farmer, a good man. He didn't have secrets, did he? I sent the children outside and forced myself to read the contract again. It was all there, just as he'd said. Wages, housing, duties. But then I saw it, tucked away in a section titled Welfare of Dependents. It was a clause, a strange one. It gave Grayson Vance the right, in the event of my incapacity or failure to provide, to assume guardianship of my children until they reached the age of maturity. My blood turned to ice. This wasn't a job offer. This was a claim on my children. He wasn't just offering to save us. He was positioning himself to take everything from me if I faltered. The pregnancy, my fragile health. He knew I was vulnerable. This clause was a weapon, aimed right at my heart. I felt a wave of fury so intense it made me dizzy. How dare he? How dare he use my desperation to try and steal my children? I was about to tear the contract to shreds, to choose starvation and homelessness over his monstrous proposition, when Emma came back inside. Her face was pale. Mama, she said, her voice trembling, I think we should go live with the nice man." I stared at her, speechless. "I understand," she said, her voice suddenly sounding years older than 8. "I understand we don't have enough food. I understand that you cry when you think we're asleep. I understand that Samuel is getting so skinny." She took a deep breath, her small shoulders squared with a terrible resolve. "And I understand that sometimes grown-ups need help, even if they don't want to ask for it." The simple, brutal honesty of it shattered my anger, leaving only a hollow ache. She had been carrying this weight, too. My brave little girl, watching her mother fail, watching her family crumble. "You think we can trust him?" I whispered, my own pride feeling like a foolish, selfish thing. She nodded. "He gave Bessie back, Mama. He didn't have to. That means something, doesn't it?" Her faith, so pure and simple, shamed my suspicion. Maybe I was wrong. Maybe the clause was just a legal formality, a rich man's way of ensuring all the bases were covered. Maybe the unfinished business was a debt of honor, not a threat. What choice did I have? Stay here and watch my children starve? Or walk into the lion's den and pray he wasn't a lion? That afternoon, I packed our few belongings into the battered trunk that had belonged to my mother. As the sun set on the home Robert had built, I sat on the porch with my children, my heart a tangle of fear and a tiny, fragile flicker of hope. The next morning, we loaded our lives into the wagon and set off for the Vance Ranch. We were leaving behind the only home my children had ever known, heading toward a man who held a secret about their father. A man who had a legal claim on them written into a contract I had just signed. It wasn't a new chapter. It felt like I was signing my family over, page by page, to a story I had no control over. A story whose ending was already written by a man I didn't know at all. The Vance Ranch wasn't just a ranch. It was a kingdom. Whitewashed fences stretched for miles in every direction, enclosing pastures so green they hurt the eyes. The main house was a 2-story giant with a wide, welcoming porch, big enough to swallow our little homestead whole. It was a monument to a prosperity I couldn't even fathom. "Look at all those horses," Samuel breathed, his voice filled with a wonder that made my heart ache. "It's very big," Emma said quietly, her hand tightening on my arm. She felt it too, the sense that we were minnows swimming into a whale's mouth. Grayson met us as we pulled up, his presence as solid and imposing as his house. He helped me down from the wagon, his touch careful and courteous. But his eyes held that same unreadable expression, a mixture of concern and something else, something that looked like possession. "Welcome to Vance Ranch," he said. He led us to our quarters, a small, perfectly built cottage set back from the main house. It was a palace compared to what we'd left. 3 rooms, a stone fireplace, even a water pump right there in the kitchen. "There's no bucket to carry," Emma whispered, her eyes wide with amazement. Someone, he said it was his twice-a-week housekeeper, Mrs. Patterson, had placed fresh wildflowers in a jar on the table. The pantry was stocked. The beds were soft. It was all too perfect. It felt like a beautifully decorated trap. "I hope it suits," Grayson said. "It's more than generous," I managed to say. Then he got down to business. "The pay is $15 a month, plus housing and meals. Your debts will be your own to manage, but you'll have the means." He paused, and his voice became more formal. "Mrs. Monroe, I want to be clear. This is a business arrangement. You work for wages. You owe me nothing more than a good day's work. Is that understood?" The words were meant to reassure me, to give me back a piece of my dignity, but all I could think about was the clause in the contract, the one that gave him power over my children. "Understood," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "Grayson," he corrected gently, "we'll be working closely. Formality seems unnecessary." "Leia," I offered in return, the name feeling strange on my tongue. The first few weeks passed in a blur of routine. I cooked, I cleaned, I managed the household accounts. Grayson was a man of predictable habits, rising before dawn and working until dusk. He was polite, distant, and treated me with a professional respect that was almost more unnerving than open hostility. The true currency of our deal, I soon realized, was not the $15 a month. It was my children. He took an immediate shine to Samuel, answering his endless questions about horses with a patience I hadn't seen in a man since Robert. He'd let Samuel help with the chores, his large, calloused hands guiding my son's small ones. He was different with Emma. He seemed to recognize the old soul in her eyes. He brought her books from his library, books far beyond her years, and would talk to her not as a child, but as an equal. I watched these exchanges with a heart torn in two. A part of me was grateful. My children were smiling again. They were eating well. They had a strong male figure in their lives who was kind and attentive. But another part of me, the dark, suspicious part, saw it for what it was. He was winning them over. He was building a bond, forging a connection that would make his claim on them, should he ever choose to exercise it, all the stronger. He wasn't just their mother's employer, he was becoming their friend, their mentor. The unfinished business with Robert remained a ghost between us, a topic he never raised again. But I felt it all the time. One afternoon, he found me looking at the one photograph I had of Robert. "He was a good man," Grayson said, his voice startling me. "The best," I said, my throat tight. He looked at the photograph for a long moment. "Did he ever talk about his time working the rail lines before he met you?" I frowned. "The rail lines? No, he was a farmer his whole life. His father was a farmer." A strange look flickered across Grayson's face, a shadow he quickly concealed. "Of course. My mistake. Must be thinking of someone else." But he wasn't. I knew he wasn't. Another lie. Another piece of the puzzle that didn't fit. Robert, a railroad worker? It was impossible. Yet Grayson had said it with such certainty. That night, as I lay in my soft, comfortable bed, in my safe, perfect cottage, I felt more trapped than ever. The secrets were piling up, building a wall around me. Grayson Vance wasn't just a man with a mysterious past. He was a man who knew a version of my husband that I didn't. He was slowly, patiently, weaving himself into the fabric of my family's life. And I was beginning to fear that the clause in the contract wasn't a weapon to be used in the future. The trap had already been sprung. He was just waiting for me to realize it. The first crack in Grayson's carefully constructed wall of professional distance came on a Sunday. He insisted we ride with him to church in his buggy, a fine carriage with padded leather seats. He said it wasn't proper for me to walk the 3 miles in my condition. I said it wasn't proper for his housekeeper to arrive with him like family. He won. Walking into that small white church felt like walking into a den of wolves. The whispers started the moment we stepped out of the buggy. Every head turned. Every conversation stopped. I could feel their eyes on my back, on my swollen belly, on the way my children walked so comfortably beside this wealthy, solitary man. Mrs. Henderson, the banker's wife, stopped us near the door, her smile as sharp as broken glass. "Grayson, how lovely to see you," she cooed, her eyes flicking over me with disdain. "And this must be your housekeeper." She said the word like it was something she'd scraped off her shoe. "Mrs. Monroe is managing my household, yes," Grayson replied, his voice dangerously even. His hand settled on the small of my back, a gesture of support that sent a fresh wave of murmurs through the pews. We sat in the Vance family pew, a place his family had occupied for 3 generations. The symbolism was not lost on anyone. We were a spectacle, the rich widower, the pregnant widow, and her 2 fatherless children. The town had already written our story, and it was a scandalous one. After the service, a local rancher named Tom Garrett cornered us outside. His eyes were smug, his smile ugly. "Vance," he said, letting his gaze slide over me. "Interesting arrangement you've got yourself there. Mighty convenient, having live-in help so grateful." The implication was as clear as it was vile. Before I could even react, the change in Grayson was terrifying. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. The air around him grew cold. "I suggest you think very carefully about your next words, Garrett," he said, his voice low and hard as granite. "Mrs. Monroe is a respectable woman. Anyone who suggests otherwise will answer to me, personally." Garrett paled, mumbled an apology, and practically fled. The ride home was silent, the air thick with unspoken things. He had defended me, publicly, fiercely. It wasn't the act of a detached employer. It was the act of something more. "You're under my protection now, Laya," he said, his eyes fixed on the road ahead. "All of you. That means something." Under his protection. The words should have comforted me, but they sent a chill down my spine. It felt less like a promise and more like a declaration of ownership. The wall between us began to crumble after that. He started taking his evening meals in the main house kitchen while I cooked. He'd sit at the big wooden table, asking about my day, about the children. He talked about his late wife, Catherine, for the first time. Not as a perfect saint, but as a real person. "She was bright, like sunlight," he said, his voice thick with memory. "But she could burn water, this place, this quiet life. It wasn't her dream. She wanted cities, travel, California." I told him about Robert, about our simple dreams of building a family on our small plot of land. And as we talked, sharing the ghosts of our pasts, I felt a flicker of something I hadn't felt in years. A connection, a dangerous, unwelcome connection to this man of secrets. One evening, he was looking at the little wooden horse my Robert had carved for Samuel. "This is beautiful work," Grayson said, running a thumb over the smooth wood. "He had a real gift. It's a shame he had to give it up." I frowned. "Give it up? He carved things his whole life." Grayson looked up, and for a second, I saw that flicker of a mask slipping again. "I just mean, it's a shame a man with such a delicate touch had to work such a hard life. Farming is brutal." Another near slip, another hint of a past I didn't know. He was testing me, dropping little pebbles into the water to see the ripples. The real earthquake came a week later. I woke up with a sharp, cramping pain low in my back. I tried to ignore it, but by the time Grayson came for breakfast, I was doubled over, gasping. He took one look at me and all professional distance vanished. "That's not tiredness," he said, his voice sharp with alarm. "You're seeing the doctor, now!" He half carried me to the buggy and drove to town at a speed that rattled my teeth, his face a grim mask of concern. Dr. Patterson, a kind man with gentle hands, confirmed my fears. I was in preterm labor. "Complete bed rest," the doctor ordered, his face serious. "For at least 2 weeks, maybe more. No lifting, no stress, or you could lose this baby." Lose the baby. The words hit me with the force of a physical blow. "I can't," I protested, my mind reeling. "The work, the children, the work will be handled," Grayson interrupted, his voice leaving no room for argument. "Mrs. Patterson can come full time. Your only job is to stay in that bed and keep that baby safe. The rest is my concern." His concern, his responsibility, my incapacity. The words from the contract echoed in my head. This was it. This was the moment the weapon could be used. I was incapacitated. I was failing to provide. According to the contract I had signed, he now had legal grounds. I was confined to a bed, completely helpless, while the man who held a secret about my husband, the man who had a contractual claim on my children, took complete control of our lives. He wasn't a predator circling his prey anymore. He was a spider, and I had just walked right into the center of his web. My own body had betrayed me, springing the trap he had so patiently set. Bed rest was a special kind of torture. I lay in that room, a prisoner in a soft bed, listening to the sounds of my life being managed by someone else. Grayson had hired Mrs. Patterson full-time. I could hear her in the kitchen, her cheerful humming a constant reminder of my own uselessness. I could hear Grayson's deep voice as he read to Samuel, his patient explanations as he helped Emma with her lessons. He was slowly and methodically replacing me. He checked on me constantly, bringing me meals, fresh water, books from his library. His concern seemed genuine, his kindness overwhelming, but under it all, I felt the steel bars of the cage. Every gentle gesture was a reminder of my dependency. Every thoughtful act was a testament to his control. Then, on a Tuesday afternoon, the real monster arrived. I heard the sharp official knock on the door. I heard Mrs. Patterson's voice, then the heavy, confident tread of a man I didn't know. Through my partially open door, I heard words that made my blood freeze. Court order for immediate collection. Unpaid debts of the late Robert Monroe. Emma appeared in my doorway, her face as white as a sheet. Mama, there's a man here. He has papers about Papa. I swung my legs out of bed, ignoring the doctor's orders, ignoring the twinge in my back. I would not hide while some stranger dismantled my husband's memory. The man in the sitting room was tall and thin, with a face that looked like it had been carved from sour wood. He wore a rumpled suit and carried a worn leather satchel. He radiated a cold, predatory indifference. Mrs. Monroe, he said, not waiting for a reply. Clayton Webb. I represent Farmers Trust Bank. I'm here about an outstanding debt of your late husband's. I settled all of Robert's debts with the local bank, I said, my voice shaking. This isn't a local debt, he said, pulling a sheaf of papers from his bag. Your husband took a loan against your property in 1932. The debt was never satisfied. With interest and penalties, the amount due is $647. $647. It might as well have been $1 million. The room tilted. That's impossible, I whispered. Robert never... Desperate men do desperate things, Webb said with a cruel little smile. The debt is real, and it is due. We will garnish your wages, seize any assets. My wages, the $15 a month from Grayson. It was a joke. It would take a lifetime to pay this off. I have nothing, I said, my voice hollow. Webb's eyes narrowed. You have this job. You have the charity of Mr. Vance. And according to our records, your husband had one other asset, a life insurance policy, for $500. Life insurance? Robert had life insurance. He'd never said a word. The policy was never claimed, Webb continued, his voice dripping with false sympathy. But it is part of his estate, and his estate belongs to his creditors, namely, us. Before I could even process this new shock, Grayson burst through the door. He must have seen Webb ride up. He took in the scene in an instant. My pale face, the papers on the table, the vulture in the cheap suit. What's going on here? He demanded, his eyes flashing with a cold fire. Just collecting a debt, Webb said smoothly. Grayson's jaw tightened. How much? $647. Grayson didn't even flinch. I watched him, my heart hammering. I saw the calculation in his eyes, the weighing of options. He could pay it. He could write a check and make this all go away. He could buy my loyalty, my eternal gratitude, my complete and utter submission. This was the moment, the final turn of the screw. But then Dr. Patterson arrived for his checkup, bustling in with his medical bag. What is all this? He demanded, seeing my distress. This woman is supposed to be on complete bed rest. This agitation is dangerous. As the doctor shooed me back toward the bedroom, I heard Grayson say something to Webb, his voice low and hard. Leave the papers. I'll handle this. I lay back against the pillows, my body trembling, my mind a chaotic storm, a secret debt, a secret life insurance policy, and Grayson, positioning himself to handle it all. Then a new, horrifying piece of the puzzle clicked into place. Farmers Trust Bank. That was the same out-of-town bank on my eviction notice. This wasn't a coincidence. The eviction, the debt, it was all connected. And then the final, soul-shattering thought. The life insurance. It was for $500. The debt was for over $600. It was just enough to give me hope, but not enough to actually save me. Unless the debt wasn't originally that high. Unless someone had bought the debt, added fees and penalties to inflate it. Just enough so the insurance wouldn't cover it. Someone who wanted to ensure I was completely, hopelessly trapped. Someone who wanted to control every aspect of my life. Someone like Grayson Vance. He hadn't just stumbled into my life. He hadn't just offered me a job. He had orchestrated my ruin. He had bought my husband's debt, engineered my eviction, and was now poised to save me from a crisis of his own making. The unfinished business wasn't a debt of honor. It was a vendetta, and for some reason, it was aimed at my dead husband, and I and my children were the pawns in his cruel, patient game. The house was quiet after Webb left, but it was the heavy, suffocating quiet of a tomb. I lay in bed, the truth of physical weight on my chest. Every act of kindness from Grayson, every gentle word, every thoughtful gesture, was a lie. A calculated move in a long, cruel game. My protector was my jailer. My savior was my destroyer. He came to my room that evening, carrying a tray with tea and bread. The domestic gesture was so obscene it made me want to scream. "Thought you might be hungry," he said, his voice soft with fake concern. I couldn't look at him. "I'm not," I said, my own voice flat and dead. He pulled a chair close to the bed. The scent of his clean work shirt, a scent I had started to find comforting, now smelled of betrayal. "Leia, about this afternoon," he began. "Don't worry about the debt. I'll take care of it." "No," I said, the word like a shard of glass. I finally looked at him, and I let him see the cold fury in my eyes. "You've taken care of enough, don't you think?" He frowned, a flicker of confusion in his eyes. He didn't know that I knew. He thought I was still his grateful, helpless victim. "What are you talking about?" "Farmers Trust Bank," I said, my voice shaking with rage. "The eviction notice, the debt. It's the same bank, isn't it?" What a coincidence. The color drained from his face. He hadn't expected this. He had underestimated me. "Leia, it's not what you think, isn't it?" I pushed myself up, my weakness forgotten in the fire of my anger. "Let me guess. You found out Robert had a small debt. You bought it. You found out about the eviction. You let it happen. You found out about a life insurance policy and made sure the debt was just a little bit more than it would cover. You created a storm you could pretend to save me from." He was speechless. The truth was written all over his face. The shock, the guilt. "Why?" I choked out the word, tears of rage blurring my vision. "What did Robert ever do to you? What kind of monster are you that you would destroy a man's family to settle a score with a ghost?" He stood up, running a hand through his hair, looking trapped. "It's more complicated than that." "Is it?" I laughed, a raw, ugly sound. "It seems pretty simple to me. You wanted my land, or you wanted revenge, and you used me and my children to get it. You put a clause in that contract to take my children. You planned every single step of this. The clause was for your protection," he shot back, his voice rising, "in case something happened to you, so you wouldn't have to worry about them." "My protection!" I shrieked. "You have terrorized me. You have isolated me, made me dependent on you for every bite of food, for the very roof over my head. You call that protection?" He looked at me, and for the first time, I saw something other than calculation in his eyes. I saw pain, a deep, agonizing pain. "Catherine," he said, his voice cracking. "My wife. Before she died, before the influenza took her and my son, she was sick for a long time. We were in debt, deep in debt. The ranch was failing. I begged the bank for more time. They laughed at me." He took a ragged breath. "The man who held the note on this ranch, the man who was about to foreclose and put my pregnant wife out on the street. His name was Robert Monroe." The world stopped. It was like being struck by lightning. The air left my lungs. The room spun. Robert? My Robert? A ruthless creditor? It was impossible. It was a lie. It had to be a lie. "No," I whispered. "You're lying." "Am I?" he said, his voice bitter. He owned a dozen small properties, all bought with money he made on the railroad. He wasn't a simple farmer, Leia. He was a moneylender, a predator. He squeezed desperate people for every last cent. He sank back into the chair, his face in his hands. Catherine died thinking we were going to be homeless. The only thing that saved this ranch was a small inheritance from her aunt that came a week after she was gone. I paid him off, but it was too late. I stared at him, my mind refusing to accept it. My gentle Robert, who carved wooden horses and dreamed of a big family, a ruthless moneylender, the man who put Grayson and his dying, pregnant wife out of their home. When I heard Robert had died, Grayson continued, his voice hollow, and left his own wife in the same position he'd put me in, it felt like some kind of cosmic justice. I found the debt he owed to Farmers Trust. I bought it. Yes, I admit it. I wanted you to feel what I felt. I wanted you to know the same terror. So it was true. All of it. He had engineered my ruin. It was revenge. But then I met you, he whispered, looking up at me, his eyes filled with a raw agony. I saw you at that auction, so proud, so fierce, fighting for your children. And I saw Catherine. I saw myself. And the hate. It just started to crumble. He stood and came toward the bed, his hands open, palms up, in a gesture of surrender. I came here to punish you, Laya, but I ended up falling in love with you. The confession hung in the air, more shocking than the revelation about Robert. Love, this twisted, toxic obsession. I tried to stop it, he said desperately. I tried to keep my distance, but watching you with Emma and Samuel, seeing your strength, your kindness, you brought this house back to life. You brought me back to life. I stared at him, my heart a battlefield of conflicting emotions, rage, betrayal, grief for a husband I never really knew. And under it all, a tiny, treacherous flicker of something else. He loved me. This man who had destroyed me, who had plotted against me, who had based his entire plan on a foundation of hate and revenge, loved me. The debt collector is coming back, I said, my voice numb. Webb. I know, he said. And I will pay it. I will fix this. I swear to you, Laya, I will spend the rest of my life making this right. But how could he? The truth was out, a venomous snake coiling between us. My husband was a monster. My savior was a manipulator. And I was trapped in a prison built of lies, secrets, and a love so twisted it might be just another name for hate. The storm hit that Saturday, a physical manifestation of the tempest in my soul. The sky turned a sickening green-black, and the wind began to howl like a banshee. Grayson, his face grim, organized the ranch hands, securing the livestock, boarding up windows. His competence was infuriating. He could command the elements, but he couldn't undo the damage he'd done to my heart. We have to go to the root cellar, he announced, his voice tight against the rising shriek of the wind. The journey across the 50 yards of open ground from my cottage to the main house cellar was a nightmare. Rain lashed down, driven by a wind so powerful it felt like a solid wall. I leaned on Grayson, hating my dependency, hating the strength of the arm around my waist that was both my support and my cage. We huddled in the stone-lined cellar, me, Emma, Samuel, Grayson, Mrs. Patterson and her daughter Mary, and 2 young ranch hands. The world above us was coming apart. We could hear the crash of thunder, the roar of the wind, and the sickening splintering sound of giant trees being torn from the earth. Samuel, terrified, crawled into my lap. Emma, ever my brave soldier, sat pressed against my side, her small body trembling. In the flickering light of a single lantern, surrounded by the chaos of the storm, the truth of our situation was stark. We were all trapped. Grayson, trapped by his past and his guilt. Me, trapped by his actions and the ghost of a husband I no longer recognized. My children, trapped between us. The storm passed by morning, leaving behind a world scoured clean and broken. The sun rose on a scene of devastation. A barn roof was gone. Fences were flattened. The ancient oak tree by the main house had been split in 2. The cost of repairs would be enormous, but the storm had brought more than physical destruction. It had triggered a financial panic. Mr. Henderson from the local bank arrived 2 days later, his face gray with worry. "Grayson, I'm sorry," he said, twisting the brim of his hat in his hands. "The storm caused a run on the banks in the city. Farmers Trust has called in all their loans to stay solvent. To protect our own depositors, we have to do the same. We need your property loan paid, in full, within 30 days. How much, James? Grayson asked, his voice dangerously quiet. $1,400. $1,400, on top of my debt to Webb, on top of the catastrophic storm damage. It was a death blow. We were ruined, utterly and completely. The irony was so bitter it tasted like poison. Grayson's revenge had come full circle. In trying to destroy me, he had destroyed himself. His patient, cruel game had backfired, and now we were both sinking on the same ship he had scuttled. We sat in silence after Henderson left, the weight of the numbers crushing the air out of the room. Over $2,000, an impossible, astronomical sum. I'm sorry, I said finally, the words hollow. This is my fault. I brought this trouble to your door. No, he said, his voice rough with emotion. This is my fault. All of it. My hatred, my pride. It brought us to this. He looked at me, his eyes filled with a despair so deep it mirrored my own. We're in this together now, Leia, for what it's worth. Together. The word was a mockery. We were together in ruin, shackled by debts and lies. That afternoon, driven by a desperate, hopeless need to do something, I was in Grayson's office. He had asked me to look for the ranch's insurance papers to see if any of the storm damage was covered. The office was a testament to his orderly mind, ledgers stacked neatly, papers filed. But behind a stack of books on a high shelf, my fingers brushed against a small wooden box. It wasn't a file box. It was personal, carved with the initial C, Catherine's. My hands trembled as I took it down. It felt like sacrilege, like disturbing a grave, but I couldn't stop myself. I opened it. Inside were letters, tied with a faded blue ribbon. Catherine's letters to him, and on the very bottom, there was something else, a single thick envelope, sealed with wax. But it wasn't addressed to Grayson. It was addressed to Robert Monroe. My heart stopped beating. I sank into the desk chair, the envelope shaking in my hand. What in God's name was this? A letter from Catherine, to my husband? Grayson found me there, pale and trembling, holding the impossible letter. What is that? He asked, his voice tight. When he saw the name on the envelope, he looked as if he'd been struck. Where did you get that? It was in her box, I whispered. Grayson, why would your wife write a letter to my husband? He stared at the envelope as if it were a snake. I don't know, he said, but his eyes told a different story. There was a flicker of something, a dawning horror, a memory trying to surface. Open it, I said. My voice was a command. With shaking fingers, he broke the wax seal. He unfolded the single sheet of paper inside. He read it, and all the color drained from his face. He sank into the chair opposite me, the letter falling from his limp fingers onto the desk. What does it say? I demanded, my voice raw. He couldn't speak. He just pointed at the letter. I picked it up. The handwriting was elegant, feminine. The words were simple, and they destroyed the last vestiges of the world I thought I knew. Mr. Monroe, I know my husband has asked you for an extension on our loan. I know you have refused. I am writing to you not as a debtor, but as a mother. I am dying. My child will be born soon, and I will not live to see him grow. My only wish is that he has a home. My husband's pride will not let him beg, so I will. I am enclosing the last thing of value I have in this world. It is a pearl necklace, a family heirloom. Its value is just over $700. It is more than enough to satisfy the debt. Please, I implore you, accept this. Release the lien on our home. Give my son a chance at a life I will never have. Do not tell my husband about this. He would never forgive me for selling it, nor himself for allowing it. Let him believe his inheritance saved him. Let him keep his pride. It is all he will have left when I am gone. Yours, in desperation, Catherine Vance. I dropped the letter. My mind was screaming. She paid the debt. Catherine paid the debt. She gave my husband her last precious possession to save her home, to save her child. And Robert took it. He took a dying woman's pearls, let her husband believe he was a ruthless monster, and never said a word. The money from Grayson's inheritance. It hadn't gone to pay off Robert. It had gone into Robert's pocket. The evil wasn't just that Robert was a predator. He was a thief. He had stolen from a dying woman. The foundation of our lives, the small farm, the little money we'd had, it was all built on this grotesque secret sin. The debt, I whispered, looking at Grayson, my eyes wide with horror. The debt you bought from Farmers Trust, it wasn't real. It was fraudulent. Robert never owed them that money. He owed it to you. Grayson looked up, his face a mask of dawning, gut-wrenching understanding. The unfinished business. I thought it was just business, but this is a sin. The whole sordid, twisted story was finally clear. Grayson's revenge, my ruin, it was all based on a lie my husband had created, a lie that had festered for years, poisoning everything it touched. And then, another piece clicked into place. The life insurance policy, for $500. Webb had said it was part of Robert's estate. But what if it wasn't? What if Robert, in a rare secret moment of guilt, had taken out that policy not for me, but for Grayson? What if it was his pathetic attempt at repayment? But where was the proof? Where was the policy itself? And then I saw it, tucked into the flap of the very envelope Catherine's letter had come in. Another folded document. I pulled it out. It was the original life insurance policy, and the beneficiary was not Leah Monroe. It was Grayson Vance. The policy was the proof that the debt was his, and the proof that Robert had tried, in his own cowardly way, to make it right. It was a legal document that could unravel everything. But it was in my hand. I could destroy it. I could let Grayson's ruin proceed, a just punishment for his own vengeful schemes. Or I could give it to him, and in doing so, acknowledge the full depth of my own husband's monstrous betrayal. We stared at each other across the desk, two souls shipwrecked by the sins of the dead. The air crackled with the weight of our impossible choice. In my hand, I held the key to his salvation or his destruction. The labor pains started at dawn, a cruel, punctual guest arriving on the very day Clayton Webb was due to return. The timing was so perversely perfect, it felt like a final, mocking joke from a merciless God. As the first contraction seized me, sharp and undeniable, the chaos of the past few days evaporated, replaced by a single primal focus. This baby was coming. "Grayson!" I called, and he was there in an instant, his face etched with a new kind of terror. He moved with frantic efficiency. "I'll send for the doctor, for Mrs. Patterson." "No!" I gasped, breathing through the pain. "Not just them. Send for Sarah Garrett, for the other ranch wives. Send for everyone." If I was going to go through this, I would not do it alone, isolated in my shame. I would be surrounded by the community Grayson's actions and Robert's sins had almost cost us. Let them all bear witness. Within the hour, my small bedroom was filled with women who had whispered about me, judged me, pitied me. But the ancient, sacred ritual of childbirth erased all of that. Today, we were just women, united in the face of life and death. Sarah Garrett, whose husband had insulted me, was now wiping my brow with a cool cloth. Mrs. Patterson was a rock of calm competence. The news came back that the bridge was out from the storm. Dr. Patterson couldn't get through. It would have to be Mrs. Patterson. It would have to be us. "The head is crowning!" she announced, her voice a beacon in my sea of pain. And at that exact moment from the other room, I heard a man's cold, unwelcome voice. "I'm afraid I can't extend the deadline, Mr. Vance," Clayton Webb said, his tone dripping with impatience. "The debt is due today." "Get out of my house," Grayson snarled, his voice a low growl of pure fury. "I will not. I'm here to begin seizure proceedings." "Push!" Mrs. Patterson yelled. "Now, Leah, push!" I screamed, a raw animal sound, pouring every ounce of my fear, my rage, my grief, and my desperate love into that one final world-splitting effort. And then a cry. Not mine. A new cry. Strong, indignant, and miraculously alive. A son. My son. Mrs. Patterson laid him on my chest, a warm, writhing miracle. He was perfect. He was whole, and in that moment, nothing else mattered. Not the debts, not the lies, not the ghosts of the men who had failed me. James, I whispered, tears of relief and exhaustion streaming down my face. His name is James. Emma was at my side, her eyes wide with awe, stroking her new brother's tiny hand. The argument in the next room escalated. I could hear Webb's smug pronouncements, Grayson's impotent rage. Then I did something I hadn't known I was going to do. I looked at Mrs. Patterson. Help me up.
Child, you need to rest. No, I said, my voice filled with a strange new strength. I need to end this. Leaning on Sarah Garrett, I walked out of that bedroom. I was a mess of sweat and tears. But I felt like a queen. I was holding the life insurance policy, crumpled in my fist. The room went silent when they saw me. Webb looked momentarily flustered. Grayson rushed to my side, his face a mask of anguish and concern. Mrs. Monroe, Webb began, regaining his composure, while I congratulate you, the sum of $947 is due, or I will start with the livestock. You will do nothing, I said, my voice clear and steady. I held up the crumpled insurance policy. This is a life insurance policy taken out by my late husband. The beneficiary is Grayson Vance. The value is $500. It is his legal property. I handed it to Grayson. His eyes widened as he saw his own name. Webb scoffed. That's fine, but it doesn't cover the full amount. You're still short. Am I? I said. Then I looked past Webb, past Grayson, to the crowd of faces gathered in the doorway. The women who had helped me, their husbands standing awkwardly behind them. Reverend Matthews had arrived, his face full of concern. Even Mr. Henderson, the local banker, was there. My husband, Robert Monroe, I said, my voice ringing through the small house, was not the man I thought he was. He was a man who took a dying woman's last possession to settle a debt. He was a man whose sin has haunted this valley for 5 years. A gasp went through the room. I looked at Grayson, and I saw the agony in his eyes. And Mr. Vance, I continued, my voice softening, is a man who let revenge harden his heart. A man who plotted against a widow and her children to right a wrong that was based on a lie. Now all eyes were on Grayson, who looked like he wanted the floor to swallow him whole. We have all been living with ghosts, I said, and these debts, they are not just money. They are the wages of those sins. And today, we are going to pay them. Then the most amazing thing happened. Sarah Garrett stepped forward, holding a small tin box. We took up a collection, she said quietly. From the church fund, from the quilting circle, it's not much, $150. Tom Garrett, her husband, stepped up next to her. He looked ashamed. Robert Monroe once pulled my son from a freezing creek, he said, his voice thick. I never repaid that debt. Add another 50. One by one they came forward. Small offerings, a few dollars here, a pledge of work there. It was a flood of small kindnesses, a testament to a community's power to heal its own wounds. It wasn't enough. Not nearly enough. Webb stood there, tapping his foot, a smug look on his face. A touching display, he sneered. But you're still short. No, a new voice said. They're not. Everyone turned. It was Catherine Vance's parents, an elderly, dignified couple I had never seen before, who must have been summoned by the Reverend. Catherine's mother, a woman with eyes as gray as Grayson's, stepped forward. She was holding a velvet pouch. When our daughter wrote to that man, Monroe, she said, her voice trembling with an old anger. She also wrote to us. She told us what she had done. We never told Grayson. We wanted to respect her wishes to protect his pride. She opened the pouch and poured a cascade of shimmering pearls onto the table. The necklace. Catherine's necklace. We hired a man to track down Mr. Monroe and buy this back from him after Catherine's death, her father explained. Monroe was a greedy fool. He sold it for a pittance. We have kept it all these years, a secret reminder of his cruelty. Catherine's mother looked at Webb. "What is the value of these, sir? I believe they are appraised at well over $2,000. Webb's jaw dropped. He was speechless. Then Grayson did the last thing I ever expected. He stepped forward, took my hand, and knelt before me, in front of the entire town. "Leah Monroe," he said, his voice thick with tears. "I have wronged you more than any man has a right to wrong a woman. I don't deserve your forgiveness. I don't deserve your kindness, but I love you, and I cannot live another day without you as my wife." He pulled a simple gold band from his pocket. It was his own mother's. "Marry me, Leah," he pleaded. "Not to solve this debt. That is solved. Marry me so we can build a new life, a good life, out of the ashes of all these lies." The whole room held its breath. Here was my choice, laid bare for all to see, a future with a man who had planned my ruin but had found his own redemption. A man who had shown me the very worst of himself, and then the very best. My newborn son was crying in the other room. My 2 older children were staring, their eyes wide with hope.
And I knew with a certainty that settled deep in my bones that some ghosts can only be banished by the promise of a new dawn. "Yes," I whispered. "Yes." 6 months later, I stood on the porch of our home, watching the sun set over the Vance Ranch. Our ranch. James, my chubby, happy son, was asleep in my arms. Emma and Samuel were chasing fireflies in the yard, their laughter echoing in the evening air. The pearls were gone, sold to pay off not only my phantom debt, but Grayson's loan from the bank as well. The life insurance policy was framed and hung in Grayson's office, a stark reminder of the complex legacies left by the dead. Catherine's parents had become a beloved part of our lives, doting on the grandchildren their daughter never got to have. Grayson came and stood behind me, wrapping his arms around my waist. He rested his chin on my shoulder, his familiar weight a comfort, a promise. "No regrets?" he asked quietly. I thought of the long, twisted road that had brought us here, the lies, the revenge, the heartbreak, the incredible, shocking, redemptive power of truth. "None," I said, and I meant it. Not a single one. We had faced down our ghosts and found that love, real love, wasn't about perfection. It was about seeing the worst in someone and choosing to forgive them. It was about building a future, not in spite of the scars, but because of them. Our story wasn't a fairy tale. It was something far more real and far more precious. It was a story of survival, of forgiveness, and of a love forged in the fires of a terrible truth. If this story of survival and secret hope touched your heart, make sure you hit that subscribe button. You never know what secrets are buried in the past, just waiting for the right person to dig them up. Thanks for listening.